Alright, so this is my fourth and final video of this morning because I can only make so many videos before I run out of steam. But I wanted to talk about this one because we are going to be having a chapter test on chapter 6, which is when we were proving that triangles are congruent. Now, you had an assignment that included 4 flowchart proofs made out of cartoons. There was the one with the vulture. There was the one with a, with Nemo and some barn and a little chick and a grumpy pig. So we had those. If you study those, one or more of those proofs might actually somewhat match what you're going to have on the test. So that's a huge hint. And I wanted to also kind of point out, this is information that will be available on the actual test. And so this is the information we got on the test. And we will be... sorry, I got distracted. So on your test, it's going to basically, everything's going to be numbered. So this is the first question. It's supposed to be the easiest. This is about the same level of easy because they're level 1 questions. Then you have these. They're a little bit more complicated, 2 parts to each. And so they'll be a little bit more difficult. So if you can get one of these, you'll have 60% on this test. Now, I'm not going to guarantee it's going to be as easy as this review, but remember that you can get a lot of partial credit the more you try to study up on what we did before we went into pandemic mode. All right, so we have this diagram, we have this information. Part of the proof has already been done for us. Now what we have to do is fill in the missing pieces. So this first piece, why would AB, which I'm going to go ahead and mark, be congruent to AC? Well, the reason they're congruent is because we're told they're congruent. So if we recognize the fact that that's given and write that down, we have now got 60% on this test. Seriously. So if you remember that if it's one of these 2 things, you can write given. Now you cannot write prove here because you have to have a reason for everything. Given is okay, prove is not. So, and it's not given to us, it's what we're trying to prove. All right. The next thing is, it says this line segment is congruent to itself. This was another one that was hopefully pretty easy. If this symbol was a mirror, kind of like the mirror of Erised. That's a Harry Potter reference. But anyway, AD looks in the mirror and sees itself, or it sees its reflection. And that means this is reflective. So if this was the test and you remember just that much, you've already got 70% on the test. Just getting there. And basically it's going to be organized so that you can get to this point without too much difficulty. Now this next one is a little bit more complicated, and I think this one might be the one with the haunted house. It might be from the haunted house, but I can't remember for sure. Anyway, so we had that AD was congruent to itself, and that and that both lead us here, but we also have to do this. This says that AD is perpendicular to BC. So I'm going to put right angle symbols here. And now they give us a reason, and we have to figure out what they're asking us to do here. Now it says perpendicular lines, that's these 2 that we just talked about, form right angles. Yes, we marked them as right angles, and all right angles are congruent. So what we realize is if these 2 are perpendicular, those two angles are congruent. So I need to name the angles, and I have to use 3 letters. You might find it's easiest to trace it out. So BDA, that's the first one, and CDA, that's the second one. You'll always have to use 3 letters when naming angles on the test, so keep that in mind. All right, so now it says here that we have 2 triangles that are congruent. One of them is triangle BAD, and we have to figure out what is the other triangle. That's what we're going to put here, and we have to figure out why they're congruent. So BAD is congruent to triangle CAD. And then what we need is to figure out why. So when I look at this triangle, I see that I have this side, I have that side, and I have that angle. So it is side-side angle, and is there a side-side angle? Or there's also side angle side. But side-side angle, if I spell that the other way around, it is not going to be a method that we use. So what we have to do is figure out which of, is it the one that doesn't work or the one that does? And if it is the one that doesn't, if that's what it really is, then we have one final question to ask ourselves. But let's look. Side angle side, we're looking at the angle and we want to figure out, does this symbol touch the 2 sides that I have marked congruent? It does touch this side. It does not come into contact with this one. So it can't be side angle side. Now the only way this one is valid is if the angle that we're mentioning is a right angle, and it is. When that happens, then it's hypotenuse leg. So let's just say that you did great all the way to here, but you lost it at that point. If you've got this done and this, you've got 80%, even if you can't do anything else. And remember, you get partial credit for doing the stuff down here. Even if you hit a brick wall here, if you go all the way to the brick wall down here, you're going to get partial credit. Because if you can show a lot of what you know here, this is basically, do you know how to convert this flowchart into a 2-column proof? And if you know how to do that, even if there was parts of the proof you had trouble with, you can show you understand it and get partial credit. All right, so the very next thing we have on this proof, after we prove the triangles are congruent, is we have the line segment connecting BD is congruent to the line segment connecting CD. Those are corresponding parts of 2 congruent triangles, which is why they're congruent. So now all we have to do is the 2-column proof. I'm going to begin where I began at the beginning. That's useful. So my first statement in this proof was that AB was congruent to AC. That was my first statement. So the statements, these are the bubbles, and these are the gray boxes. So that's given. Now the next thing, this one kind of leads us here, but we can't do this until we have some of this other stuff. So let's go to this one. AD was congruent to itself. You have to include all these symbols. If you get the symbols wrong, then you're not going to demonstrate that you have a real understanding of what's going on. And that's the reflective property. And if you write reflection, you're going to get the credit. So these 2 bubbles lead to this one, but there's another bubble that leads here. So we need to kind of go back to this. So AD is perpendicular to BC. That was given. And that led us to this statement that BDA was congruent to CDA. And then here you're going to have to write all that garbage. I'm not going to do it on the video because that just makes the video longer and doesn't help you at all. So basically, okay, so perpendicular lines create 90-degree angles, and all 90-degree angles are congruent. There. Okay, so now all of these have led us to this statement about these two triangles. Triangle BAD is congruent to triangle CAD. My reason was the hypotenuse leg. This leads me to my final statement, which is what I was trying to prove all along, that BD is congruent to CD. And my reason is because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So just, let's say there were two things you couldn't fill in up here. So you do this whole thing perfectly except those two. You'd probably get 80% on this problem all by itself. So if you could only get to 6.3b, couldn't do 6.4 at all, you'd still get about an 85% on this test. So it is worth studying. Make sure you do study your cartoon flowcharts because those are really, really useful. And I will try to upload that as a resource so you can continue to study from them. And I hope this helps. And sorry, I think it got a little bit blurry, but c'est la vie. And no, I don't speak French.